Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck tech for you, but before that, just a quick reminder to please click like and subscribe if you enjoyed my videos. We're well on our way to 1 million subscribers and every single click counts. And today's deck tech is going to be centered around Lulu Loyal Hollyphant. But before we get started, this video is going to be a little bit different than my normal ones, and that's because I've kind of been feeling a little bit out of love with Magic and with deck building lately, to be honest. There's just been a lot of spoilers and a lot of releases, and I felt a little bit overwhelmed with the game, as I'm sure a lot of you have as well. I've certainly been reading about it in people's comments and across the internet, and this deck has kind of helped me recover from that a little bit, because another thing that I've been feeling is that my deck building had become very samey as of late. With so many cards released these days, it's basically very easy to optimize lists, and you can feel like you can't keep up if you're not buying every single card that makes your decks better. I've given up on that for the most part lately. I have certain decks that haven't been updated for a very long time, even though there's probably multiple cards that would make them better at this point. And with this deck, I just wanted to make something really different. Initially, I had a mono white deck. I tend to have one monocolor deck for each color, and my white one was Gandalf the White, but I didn't really like the play style because it basically was very reactive and very powerful to be able to do everything at instant speed. And I did enjoy that, but it did mean that it felt kind of powerful against people, because even though I was playing mono white, I could just react to almost anything, and it had lots of recursion packages, and it just was very strong overall. So I decided to make a new mono white deck, and my attention was drawn to Lulu. Now, of course, she has background, and usually you could pair her with any other color to get access to more cards. But I want to talk a little bit about my decision process and what I went through with this card. First of all, I looked at all the backgrounds that were in white, because I just wanted a mono white deck, and eventually I landed upon a folk hero. There were a couple of other good ones, but this was definitely the one that I was most interested in. I just thought it would be hilarious to play a deck that had a bunch of elephants and angels. I tried to get more elephants and angels in there, but there really aren't that many elephants in mono white. However, I packed in as many as I could, so that was one of the first themes that I went through with this deck. I just searched up a bunch of cards that were elephants. After that, I kind of started thinking what other things Lulu could do, and of course she's very specific about what she wants. You have to meet multiple requirements before this deck being able to do its thing, so I kind of wanted to play around stuff leaving the battlefield, but I also wanted creatures that had tap abilities. One of the first things I thought about was including a package of some kind of artifact that had to sacrifice itself. I ended up going with clues because I thought that was even funnier. To have all these elephants becoming investigators and trying to solve crimes was really funny to me for some reason. So that's what I ended up doing first. And then of course I tried to include as many cards as I could that filled multiple categories. So I wanted stuff that made my creatures tap. For that I used Convoke, and there are a couple of elephants that have Convoke, so that's nice. I also used a lot of artifacts that allowed me to tap my creatures, so that way I could kind of take advantage of having a creature tap, and also when combined with the clues of having permanents leave the battlefield. I ended up going down a bunch of different rabbit holes, and this deck is probably doing a little bit too many things, but I really enjoy playing it, and it's certainly not overpowered, though it can be very strong once it gets going. But the most important thing for me was that I really enjoyed the deck building. It's a deck that's completely my own. I'm pretty certain nobody else has this deck on the internet, and that's something that I really cherish, because these days it's so easy to get sucked into best cards and EDH rec, and for me this has kind of helped me rediscover my love for deck building. But anyway, after that very long intro, I want to jump into this deck and see if it gives you some ideas of your own. So we're starting off with Amazan Battle Priest. This is obviously very good. Having all your creatures have lifelink is really solid, and since we're putting counters with Lulu, this should be very easy to trigger. It also taps itself, which works very well with the deck's theme. Academy Manufacturer is there to help with our theme of making clue tokens. It's obviously great when we can get other stuff that we can also sacrifice to trigger Lulu. Angel of Salvation is actually very powerful in this deck. It's an angel, so it fits the folk hero requirement, and then it also has Convoke, which is very solid. Sometimes it can just be very powerful to prevent a few points of damage. If your creatures are big enough, this can even help a couple of them survive a blasphemous act. Angel of the Ruins is incredible because we have a pretty nice reanimation package in the deck, since we're running Emiria the Sky Ruin, which is one of my favorite cards, and it also happens to be an angel. This is just fantastic in the deck, and being able to cycle it for land feels great. Angelic Sleuth fits perfectly as well. It's a creature that triggers off creatures with counters dying, and it gives you clue tokens when that happens, so it couldn't be more perfect for the deck. Oh wait, it could, because it's actually an angel as well. This hits basically every metric that we're trying to use in this deck. Apothecary White is very solid. It makes food tokens, which are another kind of token we can sacrifice. That's always nice, and it also has a tap ability, which of course works well with our commander. Astrid Peth is really solid. It gives us a food token whenever it enters or attacks, and then whenever we sacrifice a clue or food, which the deck is trying to do, it gets to explore. This can be a nice little engine in this deck and can actually grow quite big. Benny Brax should be getting us cards very frequently in this deck. One of the things that I like about this deck is that despite it being mono white, it has a lot of nice card advantage engines. Bygone Bishop is another one of those engines. This is usually a little bit worse at the cards that straight up draw you a card, but in this deck we want those clues, so it's very solid. Ellen Hargreaves is almost always going to be able to draw us a card every turn, and it also has a tap ability which works with our commander. Emeria Shepherd is basically another Emeria the Sky Ruin, but kinda better because it can return any permanent. This is a very powerful effect in the late game. Glimmer Seeker is one of a small package of survival cards that we've included because they work well with our commander. This can be a nice card advantage engine and can also provide some chump blockers. Guardian of the Forgotten is excellent in this deck. It's an elephant, which of course works with our folk hero enchantment, but also it triggers off of modified creatures dying, which should work with our commander quite nicely, and manifesting is nice because we're a deck without that many ETB abilities. Comic Guide is an ETB ability, but it's just a very solid recursive card and an angel to boot. Knight Errant of Eos has Convoke, which obviously works very nicely with our commander, and replacing itself when it enters is great. Lauren of the Third Path works very nicely by having a tap ability and also providing some much needed removal. Loxodon Gatekeeper is just a good card. It's an elephant as well, which is obviously something that we're interested in. Loxodon Life Chanter can be very powerful because we have a lot of creatures with big butts, and then it can actually buff itself to be absolutely massive. Loxodon Restorer is just a solid little card in the deck. It's an elephant, which means it works with our commander, and having Convoke means it's a good way for us to tap our creatures without having to attack. Merchant of Truth is another card that fits very well in the deck. It gives us tokens when our creatures die, and it's also an angel, which of course we want. Not only that, but the Exalted ability can actually be really nice in this deck. Sometimes the board gets gummed up and you can only attack with one flyer. This can make sure that you can deal a ton of damage with it. Reluctant Role Model is a great early game card, and since we have so many ways to tap our creatures outside of combat, it's very easy for this to survive. Sarah Jane Smith is going to provide us some nice clue tokens. It's only going to happen once per turn, but we are running quite a lot of historic cards. Savior of the Small gives us a little bit more recursion in case we didn't have enough in the deck already. Scaresetter is actually much stronger than it seems. We tend to have very full hands in this deck with all of the card draw and clues that we're running, so this can often put an extra land into play, thus ramping us, and it also combines incredibly well with Emeria Shepherd to be a really solid engine late game. Scholar of New Horizons is also a perfect card in the deck. It gets counters from our commander when it's tapped at the end of turn. We could remove a counter and tap it to search for a land, so this is just ramp, ramp, ramp. It's really, really good. Spelltithe Enforcer is a one-sided tax effect, which is very annoying to play against, somewhat like Ristic Study, and it also happens to be an elephant. Sun Titan gives us even more recursion from our graveyard, and it's just a card that I personally find very satisfying to play. Unyielding Gatekeeper is a pretty decent elephant. It's not going to trigger Folk Hero unless we cast it face up, which we're usually not going to do, but even so, being able to have a way to blink one of our own creatures or exile one of our opponents is very good. Venerated Loxodon can buff our board and has synergy with our counters cards, and it also has Convoke and is an elephant, so it kind of hits every metric we need. Veteran Survivor is a nice little bit of graveyard hate that's very easy to trigger in this deck, and late game becomes quite decently sized. Weathered Wayfarer is a creature with a tap ability that can search for lands, so this just works very well with what the deck is trying to do. Witch Enchanter is just an amazing modal dual-faced card. You should get as many of these as you can if you find them for cheap, because they're just always going to be good. And Wojak Investigator can provide us some cards if our opponents have more cards in hand than us, and it's also a decent sized angel. We do need to find a way to tap it because it has vigilance, but that shouldn't be an issue in this deck. For sorceries, I wanted to highlight Starfall Invocation. This is a very strong Wrath in my opinion, and it feels really good to just wipe the board and be the only one left with something on it. On a similar note, we're also running the Eternal Wanderer, which for my money is one of the best creature Wraths in Commander. It's absolutely incredible, and it has additional utility as well, so it's just great. Moving on to artifacts, Cultivator's Caravan serves two purposes. It's ramp that also allows us to tap our entire board if we need to, which is great. Halo Fountain allows us to untap our creatures on our opponent's turns and actually gives us value for doing so. It's also a win con if the game goes long enough. Idol of Oblivion is just a great way to draw some extra cards. Paradise Mantle is a great way to tap a creature over and over and ramp us at the same time. Relic of Legend can tap our legendary creatures to provide extra mana. This works very nicely, particularly with our commander if we can't get through with it. Smuggler's Copter is yet another vehicle that can allow us to tap all of our creatures whilst also giving us some value. Springleaf Drum can act as a very cheap ramp card and works very well with our commander and all of our survival creatures. Camille's Journal can be really powerful as a tutor effect later in the game, and in the mid game it can provide us some clues. Tangle Wire may seem like a weird card in this deck, but it's a nice way to slow the game down since this deck does need some time to get going, and it also allows us to tap our own creatures to it, which synergizes with what we're doing. Thousand Moons Smithy can be a great win con late in the game. This actually creates some massive tokens, and I've always been very impressed with this card. And Transmutation Fund should be fairly easy to get going in this deck. We are making quite a lot of clues and foods, so this being able to make blood means that it's very easy to get the second ability online. For enchantments, we're playing Armed with Proof. This is already decent with just the first ability, because getting 2 clues for 3 mana is actually alright, but turning all of our clues into equipment is actually very interesting and can give us another way to push through some damage. Aura Fracture is an incredibly underrated card that can be a great way to deal with enchantments. It also works very nicely in the deck because we have a few effects that require us to have fewer lands than our opponents. This helps satisfy that very nicely. Dazzling Theater and Prop Room are great on both sides. We have a lot of creatures with tap abilities that can benefit from the Prop Room side, and giving all of our creatures Convoke is great for allowing us to trigger with our commander. Finally, Thorough Investigation is really solid in this deck. We can get 1 clue each turn, and then we're going to be venturing into the dungeon a lot because we are certainly playing a lot of clue cards. Moving on to lands, we have Cryptic Caves. This is a great way to trigger our commander because the permanent leaves the battlefield. It also again helps satisfy our cards that require us to have fewer lands than our opponents. The Spoil achieves the same thing whilst also dealing with problem lands from our opponents. Ominous Cemetery is another card that does the same thing but actually helps us deal with problem creatures. This card is very underrated as well, I would say. Scene of the Crime is incredible in the deck because it's a clue that also allows us to tap a creature each turn and can actually be sacrificed to trigger our commander. It just fits so nicely. Underdark Rift is very similar to Ominous Cemetery, just a great way to deal with creatures without taking up an actual non-land slot. And Urza's Cave can sacrifice itself to trigger our commander whilst also searching up for one of our utility lands, such as the last land I want to mention, which is Emiria the Sky Ruin. I absolutely love this card. It's very easy to get to the 7 planes in this deck, and it can provide some nice late game value. So there you have it. That has been my Lulu, Loyal Hollyphant, and Folk Hero deck tech. I absolutely adore this deck, and I've been playing it quite a lot lately and tuning it and enjoying it, and I probably will continue to play it for a long time, and it just fits very well with my playgroup. So if your playgroup is on a slightly lower power level, try to build something fun and different like this. You might be surprised how much you enjoy the process. But what do you think? Are there any cards you think I could have included? Any things you think that don't have a place in the deck? Let me know in the comment section below. I always make sure to read all your comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care.